Thank you, and thank you for the invitation, and it's been very interesting sitting in AGM. We got ours in a few weeks' time, so I picked up a few tips. And also for the support you give us, and for that nice feature article in the last Rail Trails Australia. So here is our Riesling Trail that it's Clare is here, and it goes through some small towns, so Seven Hill, Penworth and Watervale and Auburn. So it's sort of quite and it connects between the towns. So as against one that goes over a bigger distance. So there's quite a big population along the trail. And here's the elevation down below. The original trail was from Clare down to nearly to Auburn to this point, over several stages, and I'll give you some dates in a tick. And then subsequently they built another 8 kilometres further north, and that's the end as far as we go. We put another kilometre to bring that neatly into Auburn, and then that connects neatly onto what's called the Rattler Trail, which heads off down to Riverton, which is a separate organisation, a much smaller committee, but essentially a committee of one that runs ours, whereas ours is a much bigger setup. So that pictures it in the location. This will be the only slide with a lot of detail, but and just tracing a bit of the history. So the line was opened in Clare in 1918. It was quite a lot later than a lot of other rail lines out on the plains. There was a lot of lobbying to get this line through Clare. It didn't actually last that long. In 1984 was the last train. There was a fire went through and burnt sleepers, and I think the government were pretty relieved. They said, well, that's it. And it was pulled up, and it was stayed vacant for 10 years. And there's quite a big story about how it came to be a rail trail. And it was just a circumstance of time where the winemakers were getting pretty cranky with low quality wine coming into the Riverland and being labelled Riesling. They wanted some brand identity, and some of them were keen bushwalkers. They saw the potential here. And also the state government were keen on trails. So basically just about completed the walking trail from the Hyson Trail, right from the Fleurieu Peninsula to the Flinders Ranges. And they had an excellent organiser on board, a bloke called Terry Lavender from the UK, who came in South Australia, and he was a real shaper and mover, and he was based in the Office for Rec and Sport. So everyone was sort of on board. And as I understand, the adjacent landowners, there was not a lot of opposition really. They had made use of the rail corridor to a small extent, just by fencing off little bits, but nothing big and serious. So that was probably helpful. So that first bit was built in 1994. So we're up to nearly 30 years now of trail. And then that last bit, as I mentioned, was tacked on somewhat years later, and the final bit we did, which I'll just mention a little bit later on. An essential thing, and the vision of this was that it covers the length of the wine grape growing region. So essentially it is very closely associated with the wine growing and the wineries in the Clare Valley, of which is something like 42 outlets now. And it was, I reckon, a stroke of genius that they called it the Riesling Trail. But it's a lot more than that I'll show you in a minute. Well, in short, I reckon it's more a bushland setting trail, and I work pretty hard to keep it that way. We have a management committee. We're not managed through local government, but it's a separate incorporated body, and we report back to the Office for Recreation, Sport and Racing. So we work in with local government on smaller projects or issues related where the council and the trail meet and so on, but that's just as it is at the moment. So it's on Crown land. The Crown land actually want to shift the land ownership to the council, and as you'd expect, there's a fair pushback coming there, so it may not happen in my lifetime. And I mentioned the Rattler Trail, so that goes further south. It was built with a one-off grant, and essentially not a committee, but just a couple of volunteers managing that. So if you link the whole thing together, we're 33 kilometres and 19, so that 52 kilometres continuous trail that we have through this region. There is a further the rail corridor extends to a town called Spalding, and there's a group up there that are keen, but there's quite a bit of strong resistance from a couple of local landholders, farmers, and even the local mayor's not keen. But that would just be a beaut thing if that extra 30 kilometres got done. And I think, as soon as if they do seem to get a bit of a amber light, that's probably a good spot for Rail Trails Australia to help get them moving, because that Spalding is where the Hyson Trail comes through and what we call the Mawson Trail for people on more rugged bikes going on back roads. So that would interconnect very nicely. So just this is the opening of the railway in 1918, and then we had 100 years, and so the rail was pretty short-lived, really. Only 66 years, in fact, and probably the last 15 of that it wasn't economic. But we had this wonderful ceremony, and this was our contribution to that. So we got this nice train silhouette, 2/3 size, and all the train buffs come out and drooled over it, and just a beautiful little ceremony for that. So we just sort of add these features along to the trail and try and incorporate the history of the train in certain locations. And this is another one. So this was a rather grand occasion. It's probably, as I say there, the last passenger train up to Clare that came up especially for the Clare show. And the fire that went through in '83 burned all those sleepers. And we've gone to a fair effort to rebuild a section of that there and then put on top this nice sculpture. We're very fortunate in Clare that we've got a really good artist in metal and other sculptures materials, and he put that there. And also on our committee, I've got a retired civil engineer, and then some very good tradespeople who help us out with projects. So that's quite a recent one. So we've just recently put together a history of the Riesling Trail. I actually haven't checked if it's on the website, but we've certainly, it may be. If it's not, it soon will be. It's a very light and sort of easy to read version, and as against a pretty solid book put together by John Wilson a couple of years ago called The Riesling Railway, which is more of the rail history rather than this. But this traces from the train through to the development of the committee, and again, how we operate. So if people want to get a better picture of it, you can go to that. As I mentioned earlier, this is what we try to make a real feature of this trail as a bushland setting, and I'll elaborate that on a moment. This is probably a good opportunity to talk about the trail surface. So this is what we call quarry sand. It's a fine crushed material. It sets very hard when we have rain on it. In summer, it goes a little bit powder on top because of the cycle wheels that will just flick out little stones, which eventually becomes a bit dusty and powdery. But it's also, this irritates a few people, but because it goes through a lot of cuttings, being in a hilly area, it's got to be crowned. And so when you're cycling along and running, so you sort of tend to stick to the middle. But we've pretty fortunate. We've got very good trail builders, a quarry business who built the original one. They're still here. And we've resurfaced this about 5 years ago. It was a $220,000 project for about a bit over 20 kilometres. It's very tricky sort of thing to do with dumps everywhere and whatever. But so we're sort of sticking with that surface. I was interested in the debate about the sealing of the trail. I would expect that if we did seal this, it wouldn't be that long before we would have uplift from tree roots and other things and cracks. And I've had a look at the one in the Barossa, and it's just got cracks all through it, even without a lot of trees in it. Anyway, we've got other things to do besides think about that. So this is the surface. We do get a lot of complimentary comments about the surface. It's just easy to ride on. I mean, but you can go on with a road bike, but the other issue with a sealed surface is that it would then, if there were road bikes on there, the speed would be up. So you're talking 40 kilometres an hour or more, and that's just incompatible with what we often see on the trail, which is that. So families with young children and people walking along with headsets in with their dog or whatever. And so we just keep it down. So here's our amazing committee, a bit like Rail Trails Australia. I'll use the word stability. I've been chairman for 10 years. My offsider, Mark Hill, Peter Wood. Peter's been on the committee for probably 18 years. He's our treasurer. Susan Cunningham's short term, and so is Chris Roberts. Sue Worth is our secretary, who just is a terror for getting funding. Mark Hill's advice, being a local policeman, is always handy to have. Mick Mettigers runs a tourism business, including cycle hire, and then Trevor Mace is a retired civil engineer. This was quite a auspicious occasion. So this was the completion of that last kilometre into Auburn, which was on the old rail line or surface. And then this bridge, this 60-metre bridge we had to put across. I can tell you that it took, I'm feeling a bit better now about Tim, but 6 years and 5 government departments to get this through. It was just stalled at various points. Not really local resistance. No one was against it. It was just bloody finicky, dealing with people who had strange ideas how to do things. I must say, we had met with some of the Labor politicians, including Chris Bowen, when we were putting the concept forward, and he walked out of the room and said it's the cheapest bridge he's ever seen. And part of the reason is that we're able to put it down on the original concrete basis. When they built the rail line, they did very good work at concrete, and so they were as sound as can be, so we didn't have to put more concrete in. So that was a proud moment. And then we're just continuing to improve structures along the trail. So to keep costs down, when they built the original trail, so this was a bridge 1.5 metre wide, about 4 kilometres south of Clare, we call Quarry Road. Rather than iconic and much photographed shape, we've got money from the state government Office Rec and Sport, 130,000 to renew that, and we took that sides off and put it on the new one, so we kept the same shape of it. We can put a vehicle over, they'll remove the bollards if we need to. So that makes it a lot safer. We've gone for this what would you call it, reprocessed plastic type, rather heavy duty, but mesh surface, and quite durable, and then galv railings rather than timber. And this is another example of a recent upgrade. So this is an original bridge, just a small one over a culvert, and we've replaced it with that. So we're going from these timber railings to pipe railings. Still timber surface, but with the way it's made, it's just got a section on there that's easily removed if we need to replace timbers. I'll point out here, because I'll come back to this. This is an example of that's how we get some of our funding. So this is a sign for what we call a business partner. So this is, in this case, is Watervale Hotel, and it gives some directions where to go to it, and phone number and a few bit of detail. So we keep these as standard. That we get paid by these businesses $500 a year for those, and we've got probably about 28 of these at the moment. We restrict them to businesses that relate to the trail, and not just say a building company or a trucking company or something like that, but maybe a bakery or a winery or a hotel or something like that. And we try and put them at places that are not really in your face. So just at obviously the intersections is more relevant, but also to not to detract from the bushland settings. Other facilities we put along there, we just use a simple roof structure without gutters because we've got all gum leaves and so on. In this case, it's near a showground. We've been able to pipe water in to this point. In fact, I think Damien mentioned Parkrun earlier. So this is actually where Parkrun assemble in Clare. The start line is right here. And so the shelter is partly for Parkrun, and the cars just park out on the oval there. We could probably always do with some more watering points, but we can only put those in where we've got no buy. We put seats like this. We tend to use replas seats. Some are people who've donated to them. They want them in memory of one of their family. This is an example of another sculpture. So this is just a stylized bicycle that our local artist made. There was a story, it was in the magazine, I think, where this lady's was running out. It was actually
about 6 in the morning. It was still dark. She was doing ultra training, and it was gone because the day before I got a notice from the winery nearby that said it was a bit rickety and it was breaking at the base. So we broke it off and took it into the metal fabricators to get it strengthened up. So I had it, well, it was in the metal fabricators that night. I got a phone call about 6:30 the next morning from the police in Adelaide saying it's been stolen. Gives us some idea of how people look after the trail and watch. Oh, there's signs here, these information signs. The Rotary have helped us the funding with. Our Lions Club too have helped a lot. This is an example of a bench seat that's pretty much standard use, hardwood timber. In this case, it's a memorial seat for this fellow paid for. It cost us about $2,200 for on memory of his wife. This is a rather grand occasion. So it gives you some idea of the breadth of support that we get. So this is the Coffee and Chat group. So here you go. So they've raised the money by just putting a couple of dollars in a tin every time they meet, which is pretty often. And they came to us with $700 to buy one of those replased seats, which you can only see. So we had this grand opening, and then I went along to the Coffee and Chat afterwards. So we just get support from all over the place. A little bit more about art on the trail. We try and make art so that it's immediately recognisable and not just eccentric and in your face and too brightly coloured. I mean, this one is obvious. This was a local grazier who got support from other farmers. So every sheep was donated, $800 a sheep by a metal artist in Adelaide called Ty Manning. And it is, just captures your attention. Just come out of a cutting and you see that one I've mentioned. This one is the stone barrels done by a stonemason in Auburn, rather grand. And then it's 4 locations along the trail. We have these maps that people can see it and brochures. Although brochures we tend to use a bit less now because people tend to take a photo with their phone and use that phone. And this is in fact in Clare, but just a bit of story about the trail and the history of the rail trail. And there's about 10 locations along the trail where we've got these information boards about whatever. And this one happens to be the Seven Hill Winery and the Jesuits. My background is actually in agriculture, and so I've got a bit of a biological bent, but also in weed control. So we got a survey done of all the vegetation along the trail, including native vegetation and introduced species. And that's been the sort of basis of some of the work that we do. We're not into planting very much, but we are into, I'll do with what we're into in a tick. So yeah, as part of that was a bird survey as well. I mean, again, there's probably a small percent of people, but it's there for those who want it. But this is what we're dealing with. So like in a lot of areas over the last 100 years, olives and Aleppo pines have just spread through the area, and railway lines and corridors are no exception. And there's places like here where they're almost touching, they're encroaching on the trail. So we're pruning them back. And if we didn't do anything, a cutting like this in another 30 years would just be pure Aleppo pines. And likewise down here, and you see the result of it. So somewhat rashly, I decided that I was going to get rid of olives. So along 33 kilometres of trail. So this is how we do it. So we line up volunteers and we just drag them in, we mulch them up and offload them that way. If they're out isolated, occasionally we burn them. So we've been getting grants from what we call our landscapes board, so natural resource management board. About 5,000 will give us 2 days with this, and then the volunteers need a break for 6 months because they're all over 70. And we've got to a point now where they avoid me going down the street, so I actually get paid to get them to cut the contractors and drag them in. But we're nearly there. Well, to the extent that we've done 28 out of 33 kilometres, and the Aleppo pines, if they're thick in a cutting, we leave them, but we just contain them. If we see isolated ones out further, we get them out. So, and then this will allow the native vegetation, of course, to regenerate, and we can see that happening. So that's a bit of a destructive thing, I guess. So here we are. So in activities along the trail, so here's our parkrun coming up the trail. Actually, this is a lady who reported the bike stolen. And we also have one of the state half marathons here. every early April, they decided they wanted to do the 3 wine grape growing areas. So the Barossa Valley, McLaren Vale area, and the Clare Valley. And they have a special trophy for they call the Triple Crown. And so we get a lot of people. There might be 600 in that, and they'll come and go on the trail, and then decide they'll come back with their family. You know, it's a great way. It's the same with the Parkrun, because typically every Saturday morning there'll be a few visitors. It's quite close to the caravan park, and people who go on park runs will come along and check it out and say, oh, that's nice, and there you go. I must warn anyone who comes and goes in our park run, she's about 2.5 k's uphill on the way out. We link with other trails, so we go way back is the what they call the Mawson Trail, so that's the cyclists more right on outside roads, and it coincides with the Riesling Trail for a while and then heads off up towards the Flinders Ranges. This is a more recent one, so this is what's called the Lavender Federation Trail, a walking trail. It was a legacy of Terry Lavender, so it was from Murray Bridge to Clare, 320 kilometres, an incredible effort that this small committee did as a walking trail. So it got styles going over fences, but at one point they had to go, but they went on our trail. We're more than happy to have them there. And this is again more recent. So this is a local concept. So it's a 100-kilometre walking trail around the Clare Valley, and strategically goes past 22 wineries along the way. So they've gone along the trail for a short section. These figures were put up. I've smoothed them out, but well, these are cumulative figures month by month of our Riesling Trail users, just going back the last 4 years. What we saw in 2020, when with COVID, when the Premier said, get out into your state, you obviously couldn't go interstate, but we saw a 30% jump in trail users from people from Adelaide, basically. And which sort of tended to maintain. It's dropped off a little bit. You'll have this sort of little bit of a noise, but we hit this figure of 100,000, which is actually the sum of the four recorders that we have that you saw earlier on in Damien's report. But so that's how we do it, just the relative figures. You can argue that people go out and back, but some go on parts of the trail and don't go past one at all. So that's what that is. So we call it 100,000 users. I mean, we don't have a figure of what number of users, but I think the main thing is if it was dropping off too much, we would have to start asking ourselves what's going wrong. So is there something wrong with the trail that's not, that people don't like and it's surfaced or whatever? So that's basically it. I've not basically skimmed over it. I haven't gone into much detail about our financials or anything like that. But well, I can say that I've mentioned the business partners. We all also have business friends. So from our membership, we would get about 30,000, but we would spend on average in the last 8 years, we spent about 70,000 a year on the trail from grants. Whether it's a resurfacing or that completion of Auburn, removal of olives, all the artwork. It's basically we've got money from that from all various sources. So we're in a fortunate position where we have probably 30,000 in the bank, and we need to do a bit of work or projects or something. We just sort of go and do it. Damien, or no, Steve.
I'll do it. Steve. Yeah. Thanks, Alan. That was absolutely fantastic. For those who haven't ridden the trail, the artwork's a real feature. There's no doubt about it. It's really very special to come across those sheep and the kangaroo silhouettes, the various bits and pieces. It's very special. I'm still still a bit of a mystery why South Australia decides to get rid of the naming as rail trail and just calls them trails. But perhaps we won't into that in now. That gets rid of an international branding that identifies what type of item it is for what sort of activity. I'm not quite sure why South Australia decided to delete the rail.
When did that happen? Sometime, or was never there, or?
Oh, it was there, but it got deleted. I think it was the South Australian government started renaming them.
Well, I deal pretty high level with the South Australian government because the trail. I shall bring it up.
I mean, I would suggest it should be the Riesling Rail Trail.
Or a rail trail. Yeah, no worries.
Oh, yeah. So there we go. So we've got some. As I say, it's a fabulous trail, and the gradient profile doesn't give it justice because it's a very long climb in and out of Clare, on both directions. So it's who hasn't been should experience it because it's a tremendous trail and really worthwhile doing.
If I could comment on that, if you go back 5 or so years, not on the trail quite a bit, just maintaining, looking after, you see people pushing uphill into the wind on a bike, and they obviously haven't ridden a bike for 20 or 30 years, and they had a rush of blood to head, go to Clare, go and get a bike, and they're not enjoying it. And what's made the big difference now is electric bikes.
Of course.
Yeah, and there's bike hire companies, well, their business is just booming. They used to do 30 bikes a week, and now they're doing about 120, especially in the higher season. But I'd say that in recent last couple of years, probably half their bikes are the electric bikes, and it's just made all the difference.
And we're seeing that all over the country, of course. Yeah. E-bikes are they're not dominating yet, but they feel like they are. We see accommodation places like the Warburton pub that has a bike parking garage with 20 odd power outlets for people to charge up their e-bikes, so all ready to go. It's I'm sure that's replicated across the country progressively, making e-bikes the more viable option to use. I know John and Kathy, who are online at the minute, use their e-bike all over the country and have driven and ridden their e-bikes everywhere. So that's clearly the way to go for a particular demographic. It's fantastic. So
I'll go back to Damien's comment too about, you grit and you go, and then but you get all these compliments about people using the trail, and that's really what motivates you to keep it going, whether they be locals or visitors.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And the amount of work that's gone into this trail and the interaction with the local businesses has made it an absolute winner and a real attraction for the region, for the area. Absolutely tremendous. So we'll throw up, and if anybody's got any questions for Alan about the trail or about managing a trail, throw them up now, if you ever hold your peace.
Or no contact, there's my contact details.
I just got a question, but Alan, I rode the trail in April this year.
Yes.
Thought it was great. So a lot of it, just see all those photos coming back, was just a flood of excellent memory. So congratulations to it. I did have one question, and that is that how you raise funds. I mean, obviously you're using Lions Club. You're also having Rotary involved, donations. I can see all those three things. Obviously a lot of volunteer work. But you've got 28,000 or whatever it was you said was sitting in the bank. Where does and you'll get grants from time to time, I assume, from the government, is that right? Or from the local council or both?
Yeah.
So is that your main source of funds if you need?
Yeah, so if you add up the thanks, Peter. Add up the say the business partner. When I joined the committee 10 years ago, I think we probably had a couple hundred in the bank, and we had 30 members paying $30 a year. So we decided to go with this tiered sponsorship program. So we'd have nearly 30 businesses paying $500 a year, just for starters. And I'm pointing out our cost. We pay only one of our committee members who does the administration, website, newsletters, and so on, Monica Tringo. We pay her about $5,500 a year. So it's pretty nominal. I mean, people are essentially, we rely on volunteers from that point of view. And then we have other, we call business friends, who don't have a sign on the trail. So they're $150 a year, and we've got probably 50 of those. And then the rest are sort of smaller membership fees. So you add all that up, we're probably 20-odd thousand a year in membership. Yeah. We get an allocation from the Office of Rec and Sport for 20,000 a year, of which we do some contract weed spraying and other maintenance work, and then we try and hive some of that off onto structures, whether it be a shelter or bench seats and things like that. But the main ones, as you rightly point out, are grants. I should reveal my hand here, because in all my career I was mainly involved in agricultural research, so a lot to do with grants. In the last 10 years I was in research management, so I was assessing grants, so I've got a bit of a feel for it.
Yeah, got it. Okay, that's fantastic. Thank you very much. And I may be in touch with you, because I want to get a bit bleed you for some more information if I can in due course for our
Yes,
Rail Monera Rail Trail.
okay. Sure.
Very good. Oh, thank you so much, Alan.
That's it.
And thank you everybody with those two amazing projects that are on. One's a mature, established rail trail in South Australia, and one a developing one in Tasmania. I think we can see that there's a whole range of rail trails all over the country that will be developing and will be needing to be ridden and walked in the next few years by all of us. So I guess with that, we'll draw the meeting to a close. Thank you all for attending, for your time and your patience and your attention. I hope you've enjoyed the evening and enjoy riding and using the rail trails around the country.